The other thing I'll just add in terms of keeping volunteers is you got to make this fun for folks, right? Like put yourself in the volunteer's shoes. They are giving up their time. Time is precious. Time is a thing that we don't get back, right? And so to Eric's point, when they show up and they're like, I'm giving you my precious time, putting them in a corner, waiting for you to get through what you are trying to get through is not going to give people a good taste, right? And your volunteers similarly want to be seen, want to be heard, and want to be valued. And then let people have fun, right? Like whether it is like, giving them pizza or whatever, just let people have fun every once in a while.
Hi, I'm Natalie Flores-Rosinos, social media specialist at NDTC. If you find this training helpful, please hit that like and subscribe. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic, check out the description below for more free political campaign training. Thanks for watching.
Okay, thanks everyone. It looks like we have maybe critical mass here, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this panel started. Thanks everyone for joining for one of the final panels of Build Blue Week. For those of you who've not met me before, my name is Sean Hoey, he, him pronouns, based in Washington, D.C. I'm gonna be your moderator for today's panel. Really excited to talk with you a little bit more about winning volunteer teams. Volunteers are, to me, the crux of a campaign. I got my start in campaigns as a volunteer leader myself and decided I wanted to make a career out of it. Now I'm working with volunteers across the country to get out the vaccine for COVID-19. And I'm really excited to bring in a couple of really wonderful panelists who are just incredible experts in this field and have some really amazing thoughts. And so I want to turn it over to them to get us started and have them introduce themselves. They'll share a little bit about their work, their past, the organizations that they're with right now. And then we'll go ahead after this. We'll have a couple of questions, but you can also ask your questions as well. And we will get to those in a couple of minutes. You should be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, I believe. Go ahead and click on that and enter your questions. We'll be taking a look at those throughout the webinar today to make sure that we can actually address what you want to hear about building great volunteer teams. So with no further ado, I want to turn it over to our wonderful panelists. Tram, let's get started with you. Over to you, Tram.
Hey, good afternoon, I think for folks on the East Coast. I don't know if folks are on the West Coast, so good morning to you. It's early. My name's Tram Nguyen. I am co-executive director of New Virginia Majority, and it's such a pleasure to join this panel and have this conversation about volunteers. For folks who aren't familiar with our organization, we are a state-based power building organization that has been shifting the political landscape in Virginia since 2007. And have been, organizing communities of color, young folks, and just, between organizing, voter registration, get out the vote, and then policy advocacy. I think we're all proud to say that in the last 2 years, Virginia has made transformational progress and generational change throughout the Commonwealth, and I think is a good example of what's possible, especially in a place like Virginia and in places throughout the South. And we don't do it alone, right? We work with partners and we work with volunteers, and that's why I think this conversation is so timely and important. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome, thank you so much, Tram. Let's go over to my colleague Eric.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sean. My name's Eric Thut. I am the executive director of Netroots Nation. For those of you who don't know, Netroots Nation's been around for 16 years now, and we put on the largest progressive conference in the country. Really, we're a convener and an amplifier. So at Netroots Nation, we try to bring people together, but really lift those voices, the folks like Tram who are out there doing the work in the field, and make sure that they get heard on a national stage, that the good work that they're doing, others can learn from them. There's only 4 of us on staff to put on the conference that has, usually when we're in person, which will be virtual again this year, but we have upwards of 4,000 people attend. We could not put on this conference without volunteers. And then I also got my kind of start in politics in the Howard Dean campaign. If anyone out there is old enough to actually remember that campaign, it was pretty much all volunteer driven. And I wrangled the volunteers for Western Missouri for that campaign.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. And Tori, can you close us out, please?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Tori Taylor. I have been working in Democratic politics for nearly 15 years, from large presidential campaigns to being the executive director of my local county party in North Carolina back in the day. I'm now the executive director of Swing Left. We are a national grassroots organization that is focused on year-round grassroots organizing and fundraising for competitive elections. Also huge fan of New Virginia Majority and Netroots Nation. I think we are all focused on the Virginia elections this year, Tram. So we are with you in spirit, and also have a lot of people canvassing and fundraising for y'all's folks. Also, I think I've been to Netroots Nation every year for like the last 10 years. So general fangirl of my two panelists here, but excited to talk about this topic today. You know, politics is a team sport. Teamwork very much makes the dream work in politics, as also in life in general. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about the outcomes that we're working towards in politics, but we don't always spend enough time being very intentional about how we're building the teams to scale, and being very intentional about what the community we want to look like to really help us achieve those outcomes. So excited to talk about this with y'all today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tori. And just a shameless plug for our awesome panelists. I can see that their Twitter handles are in the chat. You're definitely going to want to follow these folks beyond the panel today. So go ahead and check them out. But back to the topic at hand, building volunteer teams. Again, I think this is, as we said, the lifeblood of campaigns. Winning campaigns starts with volunteers, and every volunteer get started on a campaign because they were recruited. So I'm really curious to hear from you all, you know, what are some tips that you have for recruiting volunteers? Like, how do you go about and recruit really good volunteers and really good volunteer leaders? Eric, let's start with you.
Thanks. I think my answer for all these questions is always going to start the same, and it's going to be pizza. So make sure you feed your volunteers. Getting good pizza and is key to both attracting and keeping volunteers. But outside of the pizza, really one of the most important things I think you can do is have a really clear either goal or campaign or personality that you're trying to organize around. It seems to me it's a lot harder to get volunteers in the first place to come if your campaign is, let's make our neighborhood better, come volunteer, you're going to get a few people. But if you say, hey, we're going to go clean up this block from here to here so the kids have a safe place to play, you're going to get a lot more volunteers. So trying to keep your campaigns specific and clear, and your goals clear is good. And on the goals, have clear objectives, and expectations of your volunteers going into the campaign. You know, if you are doing a door knocking campaign, if that is the only thing you can do that day, pretty much for any reason, and you put out a general notice and you get a lot of people who come who can't door knock, aren't comfortable door knocking, and then have nothing else to do, they're going to be dissuaded from volunteering for you for something else. So make sure your expectations and your objectives are clear.
That's super helpful. Thanks, Eric. I couldn't agree more. Being able to bring volunteers in, no matter what their skill set it is really important. Tram, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on recruiting volunteers and doing that successfully?
Yeah, I think our approach to recruiting volunteers is very similar to our approach to organizing, right? At the end of the day, these are people that are probably tied to one of your causes, one of the things that you care about, that share your values. And so identifying what those on-ramps are for folks to volunteer. And I think Eric is absolutely right. You don't turn people away just because they don't fit neatly into the thing that you're asking them to do at the moment. But you have to continue to cultivate and develop those relationships. It takes time, and I get it. And sometimes in high-paced campaigns, you're like, I don't have time to cultivate these volunteers. I just need people to do this because the election's 39 days away, right? And so there's always a push and a pull. But if, you know, our approach, again, and similar to to Swing Left and Tori, like our work is year round. It doesn't end, right on election day or right when a campaign ends. And so we have to cultivate volunteers year round, and we have to build these relationships and create these essentially social homes for people, right? Our volunteers are our member leaders. They live in our communities, and they should be able to find those on-ramps to connect with the organization at any given time in the year. So maybe they're not going to door knock with us over the next 39 days, but maybe come the General Assembly session in January, they're going to be willing to meet with their representatives and meet with our groups, right? So I think volunteer recruitment, volunteer cultivation, relationship management is a heck of a lot like community organizing. That's what it boils down to us, like people power, people relationships.
That's really great. I mean, relationships are totally key. Obviously, you talked a little bit about on-ramps. I'm curious if you could just briefly touch on what are some of the successful on-ramps that you have or you've used at New Virginia Majority or in other times in your organizing?
Well, one of my most favorite, stories around like building power and empowering folks and getting people within the community to volunteer and take ownership over a campaign is really our work around rights restoration and working with the returning citizen community, right? We have been working on that campaign, trying to get folks who've been disenfranchised because of a felony conviction. Virginia, it's backwards. We're working on that. We're going to get the amendment through hopefully next year. But, I think when people realize that they're not alone, right? When we actually started having returning citizens talk about, yeah, I got my rights restored and yeah, I registered to vote. It became less of why am I going to be a part of the system that, didn't actually see me and incarcerated me and kept my family down for generations. And you start to actually build that trust with each other. So our rights restoration work and our right to vote work is entirely run by volunteers at this point. They're out there talking to their own folks in their own communities, encouraging people to check their restoration status because they don't have to apply anymore. They're encouraging people to register to vote. And then, I remember when it came time to actually vote, they were like, y'all, we're excited, but we don't know how to do this. We've never done this before. And so they started forming little, just house meetings where it's like, okay, here's what the ballot looks like. Let's not be embarrassed to go into the polling place. And they did it together. And now there's a whole army of volunteers that have formed these right to vote chapters across the state. And they're doing it on their own in their communities and tying it back to our larger statewide campaign. But that was the on-ramp, right? It's like they shared some experience and they shared some an issue and some commonalities, and then they just started to work with each other, and we just created the structure for them essentially, and created some of the scaffolding that they needed to get the work done.
That's really awesome, and I want to definitely close with Tori. Tori, Swing Left, I know has been super vital in providing volunteer capacity to several campaigns that I have worked on. Tell me a little bit about how what is your philosophy for recruiting effective volunteers?
Yeah, so similar to Tram, when I think about recruiting volunteers, I think we have to remember that at the end of the day, organizing is all about relationships. People may show up for the first time to a staging location or a campaign office because they believe in the cause, but they'll show up for the second time because they believe in the people and they're having a good experience with the organizers and the other volunteers there. People really want connection and they want to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And I think that is so important to remember as we stay grounded in the why that we're here, especially when campaigns get really tough. It gets really fast paced, especially elections. And it can be easy to lose sight of that intentional kind of connection that keeps us all coming back. For Swing Left, we have about 500 Swing Left groups across the country that are locally organized. And, they are really the lifeblood of our organization. They're the beating heart of how we're able to drive volunteer capacity to these really important elections where, they're won or lost on the margins. And so we do a lot of training, of relationship building, really trying to create community within this volunteer structure that we have, while also outlining what are the best data-driven practices for voter contact, for volunteer outreach, things like making a hard ask. How do we be very specific and detailed in terms of what we need from either a voter or a volunteer? One thing I want to build on what Tram said in terms of, how we recruit the right kind of volunteers, or if someone may not fit in a specific box. People come to this work from so many different places, and I would encourage folks to not necessarily think about the right profile of a volunteer need, because it can come from so many different places, so many different on-ramps to this work, and focus more on, what is the information and kind of the onboarding that we need to provide that volunteer, no matter kind of the journey that led them to our organization or our cause, and how can we help them to help us meet these collective goals. That's, I think, part of approach to volunteer work, and also a lot of the driving forces behind how Swing Left approaches our larger volunteer community, how we try to keep people engaged, maintain that large community, but also how we think about growing and continuing to build on that community.
That's really smart. And you're actually touching on a thread that I want to pick up on. But just before I do that, I do want to remind our audience that you are welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. We definitely want to get to your questions as you have them. So anything about recruiting volunteers, building volunteer leadership, what that pipeline looks like, feel free to drop whatever questions you have in the chat, and we'll be sure to address some of them with our panelists here. But Tori, like I said, you were talking a little bit about a thread that I wanted to build on, which is once we have volunteers in the door, it's important to keep them engaged, empower them, and kind of scale their leadership within the organization. Can you tell me a little bit about what are some successful tips, tricks, tactics you can use to keep people engaged and to escalate their leadership in the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really important kind of chapter of the book of organizing in terms of what the volunteer experience is once they're in the door, because that is going to be so instrumental to getting them to keep coming back, and also for them to bring their friends. So a couple of things that Swing Left thinks about, one, we focus a lot on onboarding. How do we get this relationship off on the right foot? Whether you're a volunteer joining our team, whether you're a staff member joining our team, what is the information that we need to provide you to make you a great ambassador of either Swing Left or the campaign or the cause that we're working on? And so being really intentional about that first meeting, or those first few hours, or the first few days of that volunteer's experience. So consistency is so important. How can we provide a consistent experience where, we are following up, being lines, following through on what we say that we're going to, and best practices when it comes to managing a relationship. The way you think about your relationship with a volunteer could be similar to how you think about, your relationship with someone else in your life, a friend. What are those core components that we want to ensure are part of kind of the human experience of interacting with someone? And then the last thing I would say is return on investment. Volunteers want to make sure that they know that they're making a difference. How can we really articulate, and draw a very clear A to B line between, this hour that a volunteer has and the larger outcome that we're working towards, whether it's helping articulate how important or how effective a specific voter is, how we're tying up their individual work with the collective work of a group of volunteers or the overall campaign. At the end of the day, people are coming to this work because they want to make a difference. And, I think it's our role at Swing Left. I think it's our role as leaders and managers of, these volunteers to really be able to articulate how their work matters and make sure they understand that and feel good and feel empowered and feel motivated to keep doing it, because it does matter. And it's really important to not get lost in an election season and forget to really articulate to folks, this is why what you're doing is making such a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There's so much good stuff there. Eric, I want to get back to you. Your thoughts on empowering volunteers and creating leaders within your volunteer structure?
Yeah, I think I'll build a little bit on what Tori said about making sure that the volunteers know why what they're doing is important. Sometimes, especially if it's a political campaign, it's tough to have a very detailed and rigorous onboarding program. You're just getting people walking through the door going, hey, I'm here to help. And if you don't have a way to plug them in fairly easily with a specific goal, they're going to get frustrated. If you like, oh, hold on, we'll get you in a few minutes, just go stand in that corner, then they're going to, get really frustrated. So there's that. And I think the other part is some of the things that made me a really good worker and good volunteer made me a horrible leader. And there were things that I had to learn. So there was like, I see a goal, I know the way to do it, I am going, and I don't stop to let other people know why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I just want to get to the goal when I'm a worker. As a leader, I had to learn that two things. One, if they're doing something just because it's different than the way I would do it, and I may even think that my way is better, if it's working for them, I've got to let that go. If it's, even if it's a little bit slower, but it just may be the way they need to work. And I've got to let that go and allow that to happen. And then the other thing is to really listen to what people are saying. Sometimes at first what they're saying is like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know why they're saying that. It doesn't really impact things. But if you listen to what's behind what they're saying, it's, you didn't explain things clearly enough to me. I don't know why I'm doing this, or I'm not comfortable doing what you asked. So make sure you're listening to what they're saying, figuring out what's behind it, and trying to address that.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Tram, what about you? Do you have some tips about empowering volunteer leaders and volunteers on campaigns?
No, have a whole lot to add. I feel like Tori and Eric covered a lot. I guess as Tori was talking, I was like, yep, plus, check, plus one. I so wholeheartedly agree with the comments from both Eric and Tori. The other thing I'll just add in terms of keeping volunteers is you got to make this fun for folks, right? Like put yourself in the volunteer's shoes. They are giving up their time. Time is precious. Time is a thing that we don't get back, right? And so to Eric's point, when they show up and they're like, I'm giving you my precious time, putting them in a corner, waiting for you to get through what you are trying to get through is not going to give people a good taste, right? And, and I've been in that place too, where like, well, are you kidding me? Like, well, then why am I volunteering here? Like, I'll find somewhere else to go that's going to want me or need me. So I think it's really important, similar to like when we think about doing, voter education outreach and trying to tell people how important it is for them to vote in this election cycle. And they want to talk to you about the issues that matter to them. Again, we're talking about people, right? Live people. So they want to be seen and they want to be heard. And your volunteers similarly want to be seen, want to be heard, and want to be valued. I think that's absolutely critical to maintaining those volunteer relationships. And then let people have fun, right? Like whether it is like, giving them pizza or whatever, just let people have fun every once in a while. It's not, the world is on fire. We're all like, sprinting, trying to fix things. But it's also really important to be able to step back and to show some appreciation in a fun setting, because it keeps people engaged. And I think that's really important also. And that's when they want to lean in even more and to take the reins on, maybe a special project, or as they sort of just sit and casually, get to know each other. Skills that you didn't even know one of your volunteers might have, right? It might come up in a conversation over a bite to eat or whatever. And then you can start to actually blossom and create new special projects and new ways to actually increase your capacity and your ability to do whatever it is that you're trying to do on your campaign.
That's really great. I really appreciate that. Thanking volunteers is so important to me. I think there's an old adage in campaigns that we all probably have heard, that the volunteers come for the cause or the candidate, but they stay for you because you build wonderful relationships. And I think you all really tied a bow on that very nicely. I see that there's some questions in the Q&A, so I want to get to those. And I want to remind our audience that if you have a question of our awesome panelists, please go ahead and drop it into the Q&A. that you can access at the bottom of your screen. But over to one question from our audience. The first question that I see here, can you talk about the seasonality of volunteering? People have lives. So I sense that there are maybe two pieces to this. It seems like, how can we keep volunteers from one burning out, but I think two, well, let's start there. How can you prevent volunteers from burning out when we have these like really intense elections or, other fights at the state house that are going on? Eric, would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
To get us started.
Well, I also wanted to point out there's a real, I think, important difference between like a volunteer and an intern. First off, interns, pay your interns. They are not volunteers. They're doing good work. Everyone out there, I know it's hard. We all work for nonprofits, but pay your interns. And interns are the folks that you expect to show up at a certain time, work for a certain number of hours, and get tasks done. Volunteers may only have an hour to come in and do that, and that's a very valuable hour to them, and make it valuable to them and make it valuable to yourself. So don't treat your volunteers, don't get upset if they say, sorry, I can't come back later, or I need to leave early. We thank them for the time that they've got. And that goes with kind of, I think, the seasonality of it and of volunteers. I mean, there are people who are working really hard during the day and they're on their way home and they just want to do something for a half an hour. So find the time and to help them out and get them involved as well.
Thanks, Eric. Tram, what about you? How do you keep volunteers from burning out? I feel like it seems like New Virginia Majority, you have volunteer programs, it seems, going all the time. So I'm sure you're an expert at this.
I don't know if I'd say expert, but I would say, I mean, yes, we constantly have stuff going on, right? And I think it's just, volunteers are volunteers, and recognizing, just to Eric's point, that they're giving a small amount of their time when they can, and they have their lives, right? They have their own lives to live. And so if it fits, it fits. But if they don't show up for a couple of months, that's okay, right? But you're still providing them with information along the way. We can't always be demanding and asking of people's time all the time without giving in return, right? And so it is just like, sometimes sprinkling in some volunteer appreciation. We're not asking you to do anything, just show up if you want to. If you don't want to, it's okay. But, we're just creating spaces for you to be among like-minded folks. And I think that's particularly important. I think back to like the early days of our organization when Virginia was not where it is today. And folks in certain parts of Virginia were like, well, wait, do I want to be as forward facing? Do I want my neighbors to know that I actually care about some of these issues? And so, sometimes it's just making people feel like they're not alone, right? Creating these spaces where they can be with other like-minded folks. And so it's like, you can show up whenever you want. We are welcoming you, right? And I think that's really, really important. So it's not always you have to give X number of hours every week. Otherwise, we cut you loose and we never want to hear from you again. Like, you are our people, you are our community, and treating volunteers just like you would any other person in your community or in your, in your organization, I think is really, really important.
That's really helpful. Tori, I want to go to you with a slightly different question. I think the flip side of that is that volunteers also want to stay engaged when there isn't an election happening. That's both important for the volunteer, but it's also strategic, right, for the organization, so that you can continue to have the capacity that you need going into the election year. How are you thinking about that at Swing Left, and what thoughts do you have on keeping volunteers engaged when there isn't an election happening?
Yeah, totally. I think this is one of the challenges with year-round organizing. How do we keep people active, maintain that engagement year-round when maybe in February of 2021, there's not a high-profile election that everyone's paying attention to? The way that we think about it at Swing Left is we think about our work in two stages. We think about it in stage one is organizing, and then stage two is mobilizing. So most of our election cycles are spent organizing, organizing volunteers, building that community, training, providing tactics that can be used for effective actions year round, and then mobilizing for, these important elections and talking to voters when it matters the most. I think a couple just specific tactics that I think are applicable not only to swing left campaigns, county parties. I know a number of people on the call are from county parties. That was one of my first jobs in politics, is running the Mecklenburg County Democratic Party, if anyone is here from North Carolina. A couple tactics I would just say is one, having a schedule, of, different types of events year round, whether it's trainings, whether it's educational opportunities, social opportunities. Again, going back to how much of this is about relationships and people. They may not be coming to the campaign office or the county party office in April of 2021 for the midterm elections in 2022, but they might come back for the people that they know will be at that office. Like Tram said, making it fun, making this something that people want to be a part of, not only because they want to believe in the cause, but they're so excited to be with the people and are having a good time doing it. We can't sustain the movement if we don't sustain our people, which means helping avoid that burnout, helping make activism and volunteering sustainable and habitual, and not just seasonal for folks. And I think that, and the last thing I'll say is, I think a big part of that is also just meeting people where they are. There's someone that may have 2 hours a week to volunteer. That is all they can do. They want to make those 2 hours a week count. How can we provide a good, sustainable volunteer experience for that person that can give 2 hours a week? There's going to be another person that maybe can give 3 hours a month. We still need to approach the person that can give 3 hours a month from, the same intentionality of how do we create a good monthly volunteer experience for that one person. And you can do those things at scale, right? There are multiple people that fall into the what type of a volunteer shows up to your office. And so there are ways to build out those schedules and kind of those volunteer journeys in a way that can capture a lot of people. But that consistency, that intentionality around that connection, and just making sure we have a good, sustainable set of activities that, will keep people engaged for the cause, but also, happy and excited and having fun when they show up.
That's really great. I really appreciate that. Eric, do you have any thoughts on this topic on keeping engaged or volunteers engaged in the off year?
I think actually Tori hit it right on the head. It's keeping it fun, but also having specific events that you're going to have them come out for. Whether it's just a fun event or even a little campaign, or even maybe as an organization. Again, we're an organization that supports other organizations. But locally, what I've seen folks do that's really effective is for one group. Let's say it's the local indivisible group, saying, hey, such and such BLM is having an event. We are going to go support them this week. We would love you all to be there. We're going to get together beforehand and have a little barbecue, and then walk on over together and see what we can do to support their event. So even if you don't have something specific going on, you can keep your voters engaged, keep them part of your community and your conversation by going and finding other groups that could use your support as well.
That's really great. I appreciate that. This next question I want to give to Tram. Tram, you were talking a little bit about earlier working in Virginia when Virginia wasn't the Virginia we know it to be today. And the question in the chat is, which certainly I know I can relate to. I grew up in a rural part of the Midwest and have done organizing in some rural red counties before. And I hear that potentially some of our audience members can relate to that as well. But the question is, I live in a rural red area and we've had Dems run for office here, but no one has beat the Republican candidates in a long time. How can we keep morale up and volunteers coming back each cycle when we keep struggling to get them that win? Any thoughts that you have on keeping folks engaged in these maybe tougher areas of the country?
Yeah. Oh man. So it's finding the small wins that you can ID along the way, right? So when I think about where Virginia was a decade ago, people gave up on us, right? Nationally, folks are like, y'all are crazy that you think Virginia could turn blue. Like it was the Obama wave that won for like that flipped Virginia in 2008. 2009, we got our butts kicked in that governor's race and like all around. They were like, you're crazy. But I think, it was the local leaders who understand, we understand our communities best and we understand what's possible. And we know that change can take a long time. But it's really important to identify what those small victories are along the way. So maybe you're not winning that race this year. Maybe you're not going to win that race in 2 years or in 4 years. But you know what you are winning along the way? You're bringing more people into the movement. You're bringing more people are showing up who care, who are seeing the possibilities and who are seeing the potential for change and, want to make progress. Elections are also not the end all and be all of our movement building, right? They are a part of it. They are a part of winning progressive change. But it's not just about winning elections. That's not where our work ends. And so there's the accountability work. And whether there's a Democrat in office or whether there's a Republican in office, we are still doing accountability work. Look what's happening now, right? In Congress, and all of us trying so hard to get this Build Back Better agenda through because there's so much on the line and Democrats in the majority, right? And so there's always work to do. And so it's trying to really understand how we can make progress and make that change. We're not going to always get transformational change, period, right? Like not every victory is going to be a transformational victory, but we are looking to move and advance the ball forward just a little bit. And that's where you can identify those small victories. So even in a deep red play area, you can chip away at it, right? And every inch that you win, you hang on to it, right? You hang on to it and you build on it. And that's laying the foundation. The work is long and hard, but I can't even describe to you the feeling that we all had in November 2019 when we finally won and flipped Virginia and got a Democratic trifecta for the first time since 1993. And it was like years and years and years of hard work, right? But we didn't give up. And I just think no place is unwinnable forever, right? And on the flip side, no place is, we have a stronghold forever. So that's why we gotta keep going. We have to keep building and bringing more people into the movement, and then also tag each other in and out. This work isn't sustainable if all of us are going on all cylinders all the time. And so be okay with like tagging yourself out sometimes because there are other folks that can come in and carry on the work. But I think it's absolutely critical to identify what those small victories are along the way to keep people motivated and to keep people engaged.
If I could, yes, and
yeah, go for it, Eric.
Yeah, yes, and Tram there for a second. Exactly everything she said, but also be very honest and open with your volunteers. The number of campaigns where I've like, if we just all go knock 1,000 more doors, we're going to win this. Like, we're 30 points behind the polls. We're never going to win this. But, our candidate is out there pushing free early childhood education for all. And if we can get them enough votes that people go, oh, they did better than expectations. Why is that? Oh, it was because of this issue. Now that issue is being talked about. So be very clear with your volunteers. And the other way, if your candidate is going to win easily, don't tell them this, don't be pushing them to go knock doors at midnight because if you don't, they're going to win. What you're going to say is, yes, we're trying to run up the score right now, and this is why we're trying to run up the score. So just be open and honest with them about what your goals are.
Tori, I would love to hear from you on this too, if you have a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, totally. I'm from a deep red part of North Carolina and Western North Carolina, so I very much get it. I think a huge plus one to everything that Tram and Eric have already said. I think the thing that I would also encourage folks to do is show people the test cases, right? Like Virginia is one of the best stories out there in terms of what is possible with that year-round work for multiple years, how that can lead to, a really incredible outcome, not just winning those elections in 2019, but what those elections brought, right? The policy change that we have seen out of the Democratic controlled state government in Virginia in the last 2 years has been incredible. But there are other stories across the country, from the story of Georgia, the story of Arizona, and not just statewide, right? There are pockets of progressive change in counties and cities across the country that show that year-round work, and sometimes multi-cycle work, can lead to victories. Sometimes those victories are small, but they are important building blocks to bigger and larger change. Tram said this best: no place is unwinnable. We should never cede any ground. And in a lot of cases, the ground that typically pundits will cede is actually are the places where people need us the most and will benefit the most from the progressive policies and the values that we all share. We look at Jamie Harrison's Senate race in South Carolina. I think it's a good example of that was a tough race. We obviously didn't win, but I guarantee you the statewide candidates that come after Jamie Harrison for governor, for Senate, even down ballot, they're going to have a better experience. And because Jamie Harrison ran that campaign, that campaign brought new volunteers, it brought donors, it brought energy into the state. There's also just the logistics of what we need in order to build those steps of progress. We need better data, and having volunteers do voter contact programs year round helps us build the data, the data file, the voter data file, helping bring donors into being habitual donors, either grassroots donors or large scale donors, because they're starting to see more people stepping up and talking about things that they believe in. And even if Jamie Harrison didn't win that race in 2020, and this is a very similar story for a lot of campaigns across the country, there were steps built and, blocks that other candidates and other people can step on later because of what some of these campaigns build. And we also see a lot of candidates who run cycle after cycle. They may not win the first time, maybe they win the second time. I ran a congressional race in 2018 in a very gerrymandered Republican district in North Carolina. We lost in 2018. She ran again in 2020 and she won. So there are just multiple stories of, if you don't get it the first time, you might get it the second time, or it might take 10 years like we saw in Virginia, but the outcomes that we saw in Virginia were worth those 10 years of work. They were, Tram, I'm sure you have so much to say here, but all that work does eventually build to something that is really meaningful and is incredibly gratifying. And I can't imagine what it was like for someone like Tram and other folks in Virginia on election night in 2019 when that happened. But that is possible to replicate in a lot of other places. And I would just hold those case studies at heart, because we see it happening in other places, and that absolutely means it can happen wherever you live too.
That's really fantastic. You're totally right. There are so many case studies. I had the privilege of working with Stacey Abrams' campaign in 2018, and even though that was a heartbreaker in 2018, look where we are now in that state. It's really incredible. So I really appreciate all just the wonderful words you have to say about this. The flip side of that, I think, is some folks come from really blue areas and work in really blue areas that maybe are safe. Any thoughts on, if you're a volunteer, a Democratic volunteer, and maybe a more blue area, how can you support the party in your area or across the country? Eric, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and I think if I'm going to kind of loop in what the next question is there about getting other people to use other methods of helping out, especially in times of the pandemic, because I think one of the things we've learned during the pandemic is when people can help virtually, you can also help across state really easily. I think my mom is the perfect example. She texted like 2,000 people during the last election, and I couldn't get my mom to text or Facebook with her grandchildren before the election. So, but now she does it all the time. So, yeah, I think, helping out in other areas is great, but even in blue areas, you may, like, I'm in Kansas City, blue dot, Missouri's become a red state. I know that in Kansas City, if I help the Democratic candidate during the general election, it's probably going to help up ballot in our case versus down ballot for some other places, potentially statewide. And again, even if you don't win the election, the closer you get, it starts telling a story. Oh, maybe Missouri isn't trending as red as we thought. So just because your area is blue, your state may not be blue. So yeah, and getting involved again, it's pushing those progressive policies. So you get a candidate elected who's just a Dem, but what kind of Dem are they going to be? So maybe go out and look for those primaries and get candidates in there who really support your values and the values that you hold.
That's really great. Tram, could you maybe build on that a little bit? I believe New Virginia Majority does electoral work, but some advocacy work as well. So maybe you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I do. So on the electoral front, I agree with Eric. Like even if you live in a blue area, like I said, the flip side of no place being unwinnable forever is no place is unlosable. I don't know if that's a word forever either, right? Look at California and the recall, right? California blue state. And how many of us were like this? How many people when I was talking, hey, I could use your support in Virginia. And they're like, call me after September 14th, Tram, because all eyes are on California now. So it's just like, we cannot let go of anything that we have built and we cannot like lose sight, right? The other thing that I think is really important for blue states or blue places to think about on the advocacy front is that we also have a responsibility to push the envelope, right? When we're talking about all of the different issues and crises that we are facing as a nation, right? Everything that needs to be fixed. I think about how amazing it would be if blue states, more progressive areas, more progressive leaders could push the envelope and shift the Overton window around what's possible, right? There are lots of conversations right now in terms of how do we reframe the revenue conversation. We want to actually have a new social contract, like invest in our communities so that we can all thrive. In some places, in Virginia included, we have an upside down tax code. So like, can we start to really shift conversations and put out new policies that can show the rest of the country or the rest of the, other states, like, hey, come on in, the water's fine. Like, you can do this. Like, let's really shift the Overton window around what's possible. And I think that's really important for really progressive areas and blue states to imagine that and to start building campaigns and to win those things. Because then we can start to shift the rest of the country and the rest of the states along. So it's there's electoral and then there's the issue work and the advocacy work. And there's plenty that can be done, whether you are in a blue place or in a red place. We're constantly striving to do more because our communities need more. They need more from all of us and need more from our elected leaders.
That's really helpful. I appreciate that. I want to move on to another question that we have in the Q&A before moving on to a couple more. Eventually, I think pretty soon we're going to have to close out. But Tori, I want to start with you on this one. I think what this question is getting at from Tim in the Q&A is that he says a lot of people are telling him what he should do, but they're not contributing to doing it. How can you politely nudge them? I think there are, sometimes there are volunteer leaders who do the work and sometimes there are folks who maybe don't. Do you have any advice for him on how to potentially, mitigate that sort of situation? Because I think it's a common one sometimes in our system.
Yeah, totally. One, that sounds frustrating. I think kind of approaching this from a couple different places, because I have definitely had experiences where there's a lot of folks who want to tell me how to do my job that might not be interested in doing a Canvas shift though that weekend, or may have a lot of feedback for me on a number of things. I don't want to sign up to volunteer or come to this event. I think the first thing I'll say is I think always approach these moments with grace. It's really easy for these to be frustrating and very irritating. But just remember, you only have so much capacity and energy in a single day. And it's is that something that you want to devote it to becoming frustrated over something like that. A lot of times when I'm in situations like that, I always try to loop somebody in. If they have feedback on something, I'd be like, that is a really important contribution. You should come with me to this event, or you should come to this Canvas shift or this opportunity where you can actually contribute that perspective in a way that could actually change something. Saying it to me or writing it on Twitter, writing it on Facebook may only have a limited scope in terms of what you can actually change. It could be a good outlet, but if you're really serious about wanting to show up or contribute in some way, here are some opportunities where you can do that. So I think sometimes the tactic can be validating a little bit, like, yes, it is, your voice is important here. And then also providing them an opportunity of like, this is an opportunity where you could potentially change something or contribute that information to a decision maker, a candidate, or, if you think you can do this job better, like, you should come do it. Why don't we see if you want to be a volunteer leader and, organize your own group, that's great. You should do that. And we can work together on something like that. So I think trying to help funnel some of those frustrations or that feedback into a way where you're presenting them with an opportunity to do something that could be action oriented around that feedback. And I know we all deal with that a lot, either online or in person. And so I think reframing it as, all right, this person has something they want to say or contribute. How can I provide them a funnel in which to contribute that way, in a way that is action oriented and constructive?
Thanks, Tori. I think that's awesome. There is one more question that I want to get to before we have to go and wrap it up. Just briefly, Eric, I believe this question is directed to you, but talking about getting involved in primaries, I'm someone who's been involved in multiple primaries. At the same time, I also understand sometimes I have sometimes an icky feeling about it, because I'm like, I just want the party to come together and I want us to win and make sure that we maintain power and do really great things. Any thoughts for Paula it sounds like she's in New York, about getting involved in primaries? What's the best way to do it that maybe is supportive of the party in the long term?
Well, I come from a long line of more and better Democrats, right? I think we don't want just more Democrats, we want better Democrats to run. And that's kind of where the grassroots Netroots movement started, was let's get better people out there. I think primaries are a good thing. I think primaries help vet candidates. I think they help get ideas out there. They put issues into the mainstream that may not have gotten there when you have a conservative and a liberal talking against each other. It tends to be middle of the road. Well, when you have two liberals talking, all of a sudden they're debating who's got the more progressive idea to solve the solution. And I think that's a good thing. Find a candidate you like, find someone you want to support, go ahead and support them. I personally won't support a candidate who talks down the other candidates. I only want candidates who are willing to talk up themselves. And those are the folks that I look for to support. But as soon as that switch is flipped and we lose the primary, I'm over volunteering for whoever ended up winning on the Democratic side.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And I just want to lift up something Eric said, that if you're going to be involved in a primary, right, do it positively and make sure that you remember at the end of the day, whoever wins that primary, we're going to support that person. And how you conduct yourself if you're involved in a primary is really important. So thanks for lifting that up. We're running out of time here. And so I wanted to do just a quick lightning round to close us out. Just final thoughts. If you have one key tip or trick for building winning volunteer teams and recruiting good volunteers for a campaign, what is that one piece of advice? Tori, let's start with you.
Yeah, I always go back to something I learned actually on the Obama campaign. There were always 3 words that kind of were the parameters of their early organizing strategies, which were empower, respect, and include. I think that there are very few questions or challenges that can come up in organizing and in this work that those 3 words can't guide you to an answer, and also provide a framework for the coalition, the community, the type of campaign, the type of organization that you want to run. So Those are always on a post-it note somewhere in my office. I have them literally on my wall over there as a good reminder. So those are the 3 words that I leave folks with.
Tram, what about you?
I actually really love that, Tori, those 3 words. I actually just jotted them down as you said. I was like, oh, I really like that. I'll just go back to, how I started this conversation, that our approach to volunteering and recruiting and retaining volunteering is very much like our approach to organizing. Your community members, your volunteers are your community members, and treating people, as human beings and respect, and seeing and hearing them and building that trust and relationship is absolutely vital to any sustainable volunteer program. And so, you don't have to keep, volunteers siloed over here and like the rest of your organization and your members over here. Like it's the approach should be the same in terms of, how you, recruit folks, maintain the relationships and sustain them.
Thanks, Tram. Eric, what about you?
Other than pizza, learn their names. And if you're like me and you're horrible remembering names, and takes a lot of work, name tags, badges, and as the leader, wear one yourself. Don't feel you're above anything. If anyone ever comes to a Netroots Nation, you'll see 4,000 orange lanyards and everyone with these big name tags. We talked about one year whether we should just keep doing those with the names, and I insisted we did, because when I'm walking down the halls, I want to be able to greet all 4,000 people by their name and make sure they understand mine as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to join the panel here for just a second, taking off my moderator hat, and just give my last tip. I think all of these have been really wonderful pieces of advice. Something that I just wanted to share is that I think it is, I forget which movie it is with Alec Baldwin, where he's always said, it's always be closing. Well, I like to tell my organizers who I'm working with, it's always be asking, always be shifting. People join campaigns because they're asked to join, and then they stay because you build good relationships with them. If you don't ask people for what you need, they're not going to be a part of your organization. Don't be afraid. I know that it can be challenging to ask friends and family, especially if maybe you're asking folks for the first time. Just remember that you're giving people an opportunity to fight for the values that they care about and the candidates that they care about. And if you don't ask them to be a part of that movement with you, you might miss out on a really good opportunity. That being said, I want to thank all of our panelists. They have been just so wonderful, and I have learned so much just listening to you. And so please make sure to follow them on Twitter. I believe, again, that their handles are in the chat, and they're going to have wonderful things to say after this. So take a look there. I want to also lift up, there's some wonderful resources in the chat. I'm so proud to be part of NDTC, and I know we all are, because NDTC is able to provide just wonderful curriculum and materials to you, no matter what level you are. And so make sure you check out some of the resources about building volunteer leaders, and go to Train Democrats, or it's traindems.org, to traindemocrats.org, I believe. And then, check out all the resources there. And then finally, I just want to lift up, this is the end of Build Blue Week, I believe, and they're closing out with a really awesome panel with Congresswoman Nikema Williams that I believe is coming up very soon. So check that out. I'm sure Nikema Williams is just a wonderful person and a wonderful speaker, and has great things to say about the party. From Georgia, is one of those case studies about taking a red state and turning it into a blue state. And so you're not going to want to miss it. Anyways, that is all I have today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you at the next panel.
Thank you, Sean. Great job.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Tori. Thanks, Tram. And thanks to the audience.
Hey, I'm Kelly Dietrich, the CEO and founder of the National Democratic Training Committee. For more like this, head on over to traindemocrats.org. Thanks for watching.